Good day, esteemed members of the press. We have, without exaggeration, quite a full and eventful day ahead of us. A few hours ago, the Minister of Defense established communication with representatives of the Russian side, more specifically, with the individual heading their Turkish delegation. What was his name again? Medinsky. Yes, they connected to discuss the prisoner exchange, 1,000 for 1,000, and are currently working out the details. I believe all sides are interested in this. Well, we certainly are. I believe that in the coming days or, perhaps, within the next couple of weeks, we will begin to see some tangible and concrete results taking shape. The details and dates are already being discussed. That's the first point. Secondly, over the course of today, I had two separate conversations with President Trump, each conducted in a different format and setting. The first conversation was primarily centered around a matter of critical importance for Ukraine, the establishment of a ceasefire. These are non-negotiable, fundamental points that we have previously discussed in detail, both during the talks in Istanbul and on numerous occasions prior to that. The second point was about the United States being ready to take more serious steps, sanctions, in particular. I strongly urged him to give this matter serious consideration and to take appropriate and decisive action in the event that Russia either refuses to support the implementation of a ceasefire or demonstrates an unwillingness to bring this devastating war to an end. Third, I asked him not to make any decisions regarding Ukraine in his upcoming conversation with Putin without including us. That's a matter of principle and of utmost importance to us. We reached a mutual understanding to hold another round of discussions and continue our dialogue after President Trump has completed his upcoming conversation with President Putin. The next conversation turned out to be fairly lengthy. If I'm not mistaken, it lasted for more than an hour and took place in a completely different format. It involved not only myself and President Trump, but also several of our esteemed colleagues and international partners, President Emmanuel Macron of France, the President and Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, President Alexander Stubb of Finland, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, as well as Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission. Yes, I realize I already mentioned President Macron earlier. We had such a conversation. It was a wide-ranging discussion. From what I have gathered and understand, President Trump firmly believes that the most crucial and effective way to move forward at this point is through direct, face-to-face negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. That's his position, and he made it clear. We discussed it in depth. Essentially, he is of the opinion that the Russian side will begin to send clear signals outlining what they consider to be the necessary conditions for establishing a ceasefire, as well as indicating what they envision as the appropriate next steps from their perspective. In response, I asked President Trump that if the conditions and vision presented by the Russian side turn out to be unacceptable to Ukraine, we must be given the opportunity to openly discuss and address these concerns. Furthermore, I emphasized that the United States should interpret any Ukrainian hesitation or rejection not as unwillingness on our part, but rather as a clear indication of Russia's refusal to bring this war to an end, especially in cases where the terms being offered are particularly harsh, difficult, or simply unacceptable to us. So far, these are general discussions, which is why I emphasized the possibility of strong, serious sanctions. I don't have an answer yet, I'm just sharing what we talked about. I won't go into every detail of our conversation. We are currently exploring the possibility, which I personally view as a very positive and encouraging outcome of our recent discussions, of organizing another round of meetings that would involve the participation of full delegations from all relevant parties. We want this at a high level. The US, Ukraine, Russia, and European national security advisors, representatives from the countries I just named, plus the United Kingdom. Such a meeting could potentially be held in one of several locations, with Turkey, the Vatican, or Switzerland all being considered as viable and suitable venues for this important gathering. These are the three platforms under consideration, as all three countries are acceptable and well-positioned to host. I don't want to say which one is more comfortable, that's not the point. It's not about comfort. It's about who can organize a meeting that leads to tangible results. And I strongly believe that we will receive a clear and definitive answer regarding this matter in the very near future, likely sooner than many might expect. That's all I wanted to say.
Andriy Stasiuk, Suspion. I've also wanted to clarify regarding Putin's statement that Ukraine and the Eurasian Economic Union may begin drafting a certain memorandum. Is there any information about what this memorandum might be?
This is what I already mentioned, based on what President Trump told me. From what I understand, they have already discussed this matter with President Putin and other representatives of the Russian side, exploring the possibility of drafting a bilateral memorandum. This memorandum could potentially serve as a foundational document that would then pave the way for creating a comprehensive roadmap aimed at ending the war, essentially leading to the formulation of a formal treaty. The memorandum, supported by one or both countries, would include, among other things, a ceasefire. So far, I do not have concrete information about this. In any case, should the Russian side put forward a proposal for any kind of memorandum, and I strongly suspect that this will not remain confidential for long, as such information typically becomes public knowledge sooner or later, I firmly believe that once we have received their specific proposals or the text of the memorandum itself, we will be fully prepared to carefully analyze it and then formulate our own official position and response accordingly. That's roughly how it stands.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, thank you. Following your recent call with President Trump, as well as the subsequent conversation between the US President and Mr. Putin, President Putin publicly announced his willingness to reach an agreement with Ukraine based on certain key principles that he believes would help bring an end to the ongoing conflict. From his perspective, what are the fundamental principles that Ukraine would need to accept in order to successfully bring this war to a close?
Thank you for that question. I believe I have already provided an answer regarding these principles. We are talking about the same principles that should be laid out in the memorandum, which the journalist just asked about. No, I can repeat this information. I am not aware of the principles the Russian side intends to include. Based on what I have learned through my ongoing dialogue with President Trump, it is my understanding that the Russian side intends to send us a memorandum outlining their proposed principles. They aim for this document to encompass not only the specific provisions for a ceasefire but also a range of additional principles that they consider important for moving forward. I cannot give you an answer on what exactly will be included, as I do not have that information. For me, the principles are those known to President Trump. First, we are talking about what was already announced in Istanbul, and which I also publicized before Istanbul, in Ankara, France, London, and Saudi Arabia. So this is not the first time we are publicly sharing our principles. For this reason, I believe the first step must be acceptable to all parties. Furthermore, I also firmly believe that the United States has already shared these very same principles with us directly, and I place a great deal of trust and confidence in that information as we continue to navigate this complex situation. We are all deeply interested in a ceasefire to prevent further losses. Furthermore, as for our side, we sincerely want to put an end to this war. I am not convinced that Russia is ready for this, and we do not trust them. That is precisely why I am eager to witness a genuine and concrete ceasefire from their side as an essential first step, a clear and unmistakable demonstration of their true and sincere willingness to bring this devastating war to an end. We always emphasize this principle in discussions with our partners, including the US and Europe. I was pleased to hear President Trump's proposal for a complete ceasefire without any conditions or preconditions, simply a ceasefire. Just a ceasefire. We have already been preparing for that. So, these are our principles. A ceasefire, followed by further steps, of course. These include the exchange of prisoners of war, addressing all humanitarian issues, and the return of deported children who were taken to Russia. These are our key principles. However, as usual, Russia wants to gain something, but they don't even know exactly what that is. When they claim to want something, they want everything. That is why we will wait for their version of the memorandum, their principles. We will share this information with you, if, of course, it is made public. At this point, I do not know if it will be. Even the principles themselves remain unknown to me today. Nevertheless, we will wait. Nevertheless, we will wait.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Alexei Sorokin, Kyiv Independent. 2 brief questions. First, regarding the negotiations in Turkey. Russia has insisted that a ceasefire is possible only if Ukraine withdraws its troops from 4 regions of Ukraine. Do you consider this to be Russia's current condition? And after the talks with President Trump, do you see President Trump agreeing to such a proposal from Russia?
This is what we have already discussed. The question is not about President Trump, respectfully. Why? With all due respect. This is our land, our country, our army, and our independence. The real question is what Ukraine can and cannot afford to concede. No one will withdraw our troops from our own territories. It is not only my solemn constitutional duty but also the unwavering responsibility of our brave military forces to steadfastly defend and uphold Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity against any and all threats. Yes, there are temporarily occupied territories due to the aggression of a large country, that is clear. But no ultimatums, and no one will surrender their land, their territory, their people, or their homes. I don't know what principles might be in any memorandum, let's be honest about that. What I have consistently emphasized, and have reiterated multiple times, including during my conversations with President Trump and his team, is this fundamental point: if Russia's primary condition for any agreement is that our troops must withdraw completely from our sovereign territory, then it clearly indicates that they are not genuinely interested in a ceasefire and have no real intention of bringing this war to an end. Because they clearly understand that Ukraine will never do that. If you pose a question to someone while already knowing full well that the answer will be negative or unfavorable, it suggests that you are not genuinely seeking a constructive result or solution, but rather that you may have other motives or intentions behind the question. However, in the recent talks with the President of the United States, he believes Russia is ready for negotiations and compromise. I don't recall all the details right now, but we will see.
My second question is about a prisoner exchange, 1,000 for 1,000. Is this purely about military prisoners? And if so, has there been any proposal to exchange civilians or to return children?
Today, our discussions are focused specifically on the important and delicate matter of exchanging military prisoners of war between the involved parties. There have also been signals from our side regarding political prisoners and journalists. But I do not want to go into details now or discuss exchanging children for soldiers. I believe we do not support such an approach. Children must be returned. It is unjust and illegal even under the laws of war. That is precisely the principle guiding the group currently working under Umarov, together with representatives from the security service and intelligence agencies.
Good day, Mr. President. My name is Victoria Lukovenko. My question is about sanctions. On May 10, representatives from France, Germany, the UK, and Poland visited Kyiv. One of the main things they promised was that if Russia does not agree to an unconditional 30-day ceasefire, they will impose strong sanctions on Russia. Today, a week has passed, there has been no ceasefire, drones are flying, missiles are flying, but there are no sanctions. Please, first of all, tell us, do you feel irritated or frustrated by this situation, considering that in such a critical and urgent moment, the actions of our partners have so far amounted to little more than empty promises rather than tangible support? And second, you said you spoke today in a second call with leaders. Is there any update on this situation? Did they explain why there are no sanctions or when they will come? Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I am not irritated, I am very focused. Because these are difficult times, and believe me, I am focused because I know how to act in such moments. Without going into unnecessary details, I would like to understand the main outcome of this situation, specifically who we can truly rely on for support and who, unfortunately, we cannot count on. The European package will come, and it will be strong. There are specific dates, no one wants to rush anyone, there are agreements, and I am confident in this. Moreover, there will be a next package, definitely, if there is no ceasefire from the Russian side, a strong European package will follow. When it comes to the package coming from the United States, that is an entirely different matter. In this case, it is crucial for all of us to continue working diligently and persistently with the United States so that, at the appropriate time when they are prepared, they will implement and enforce the necessary sanctions. This will be a huge help, banking and energy sanctions. The outcome largely depends on the actions of the United States, whether Putin and the Russian military will be able to continue financing and sustaining this war effort, or if they will instead be forced to confront significant and serious economic challenges that could ultimately limit their capacity to wage war.
Mr. President, Raffaello Cosentino from Rai News, Italy. After these calls, how do you see this ceasefire? Do you think it can be achieved in the short term? What feelings did President Trump share with you after his talks with President Putin? Also, when we talk about direct and immediate negotiations involving EU leaders, was this confirmed, or did President Trump propose this to President Putin?
I do not know the details of what President Trump discussed with Putin. I don't really know that. I am only very interested in the parts of their dialogue concerning Ukraine. That is very important, very valuable for us. At this moment, I do not want to add anything because this is a very unstable period with many talks. I prefer not to comment on that. I prefer to keep this information private for now. On my side, I am very pleased that Giorgia Meloni joined this process. That was very important to me. I am also currently considering the Vatican and analyzing all possible options. I believe this is a very promising platform. Of course, I am not comparing this location to Istanbul or Turkey in terms of scale or significance, but it could very well serve as a suitable platform that our Swiss friends might be able to facilitate and host for these important discussions. I truly believe that Pope Leo XIII can help us. This was a very important message I heard from him during our bilateral meeting, which was quite productive. We also raised the issue of children during our conversation. We presented a list of 400 children. That is a significant number. Additionally, we discussed a whole range of other issues. Additionally, we discussed many other humanitarian issues. The Vatican has expressed its readiness to invite and organize a meeting for all involved parties, including European representatives, whom we will be very glad to see. Of course, it depends on all sides. The format accepted by the Vatican includes the US, Russia, and Ukraine. We would like to see the involvement of European leaders, not only from the EU but also from the UK. We would certainly welcome the opportunity to establish such a format. We have already brought up and thoroughly discussed this issue with President Trump as well as with several other key world leaders. We discussed the possibility of such a format and the need to hold this meeting as soon as possible. We also brought up the Vatican's role and considered it as one of the options, as I have just explained to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Odrim Keppel, United 24 Media. Yesterday, we saw quite remarkable images from the Vatican. We saw a picture of your meeting with J.D. Vance. Could you describe your current relationship with him as quite positive and constructive, perhaps more positive than before?
No, truly. Together with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary Marco Rubio, and members of their respective teams, we engaged in a truly constructive, meaningful, and impactful conversation that addressed critical issues and reflected a strong spirit of cooperation and mutual understanding. It was very productive and result-oriented. I believe this positive outcome is very important for us. We had an in-depth and comprehensive discussion about the ongoing situation between Ukraine and Russia, focusing on potential pathways to ending this devastating war, identifying specific areas where the United States can provide meaningful assistance. We exchanged thoughts and, of course, discussed what he is willing to concede and what is non-negotiable for him, as well as what compromises we expect from Russia and which areas we are already ready to discuss. It was a highly concrete, results-oriented, and genuinely productive discussion. So, in my view, we need to continue expanding these discussions and go into more detail. I do not yet know the mood or atmosphere of the next meeting. Nevertheless, I am convinced it was a very positive and important meeting. We need to change the tone of our meetings, and this time the atmosphere was favorable. Thank you very much. I would also like to express my gratitude to the Vice President and his team. Thank you.
Good day, Mr. President. Good afternoon. First question. Are you currently planning a new ministerial-level meeting between Ukraine and Russia? And second, you have firmly stated on multiple occasions that Ukraine will never, under any circumstances, agree to give up or surrender any part of its territory that is not currently under Russian occupation, a position that reflects your unwavering commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country. But will you discuss Ukraine's neutral status? This is also a key question. Thank you very much.
First of all, I want to thank President Erdogan. I would also like to thank Minister Hakan Fidan, Turkey's foreign minister. Our teams have good relations. Thank you sincerely for organizing and facilitating my visit to Turkey, specifically to Ankara, your nation's capital, and for also making arrangements for a potential and important meeting to take place in the historic and strategically significant city of Istanbul. As I have already said, we are considering Istanbul, the Vatican, Geneva, or another Swiss city as potential venues for the meeting. We are not seeking or considering alternatives to our valued Turkish colleagues, rather, our focus remains firmly and exclusively on achieving concrete, meaningful results through our ongoing collaboration and mutual efforts. The host side responsible for preparing and facilitating the meeting must ensure that they are capable of organizing and accommodating the appropriate level of delegation presence, one that reflects the significance of the discussions and includes all key participants necessary for meaningful and productive dialogue. We want the chosen venue to offer the highest possible level of engagement, the very highest, whether that means technical teams or, if we are ready for leaders' talks, actual decision-makers. Only on this basis will we consider and make our choice. Of course, all parties must support the selected venue for the meeting and the discussions. Regarding Ukraine's status, it is clearly defined in the Constitution of Ukraine. Everything is written there. If you have time, I am confident you are familiar with the Constitution. And if not, there is always